Hello, and welcome to the Wine Enthusiast Podcast, your serving of drinks culture and the people who drive it. I'm JC Tops. This week, we're taking a look at Napa Valley. An iconic New World region, Napa Valley is home to over 400 wineries. The region is known for many varieties, but none more famous than the classic Napa Cabernet. But as trends shift with younger drinkers, can Napa remain a stronghold in the industry? Particularly among wine lovers who are gravitating towards lower ABVs, canned wines, biodynamics, and different varieties. I first talked to Peter Mondavi Jr. from Charles Krug, and then chatted with Jeremy Carter from Tarpon Cellars. Peter Mondavi Jr. is a third-generation co-proprietor of Charles Krug Winery, which is recognized as Napa Valley's oldest winery estate. And Jeremy is the winemaker and founding partner at Tarpon Cellars, a winery in Napa specializing in low-intervention winemaking and newer techniques. So listen on as we discuss changing trends, how each of these wineries are marketing to younger drinkers, the rising cost of wine in Napa, and the future of the iconic region. Every glass of wine tells a story. These stories reveal hidden histories, flavors, and passions, and sometimes they unravel our darkest desires. In Wine Enthusiast's newest podcast, Vinfamous, journalist Ashley Smith dissects the underbelly of the wine world. We hear from the people who know what it means when the products of love and care become the source of greed, arson, and even murder. Each episode takes listeners into the mysterious and historic world of winemaking and the crimes that have since become vinfamous. This podcast pairs well with wine lovers, history nerds, and crime junkies alike. So, grab a glass of your favorite wine and follow the podcast to join us as we delve into the twists and turns behind the all-time most shocking wine crimes. Follow Vinfamous on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you listen, and be sure to follow the show so you never miss a scandal. New episodes drop every other Wednesday. Hello, I'm JC Tops, and today we're discussing Napa Valley, particularly if and how Napa Valley wineries are embracing younger consumers. My first guest is Peter Mondavi Jr. Peter, together with his brother Mark, is the third-generation co-proprietor of Charles Krug Winery in Napa Valley. Welcome, Peter. I'm so glad you can join us today.
Thank you for the invitation, JC. I look forward to our conversation here.
So, Charles Krug, for our listeners who don't know, is recognized as Napa Valley's oldest winery estate, correct?
Yes, that is correct. Dating back to 1861 when Charles Krug founded the winery and built it up.
So can you give us a brief history of that trajectory?
Sure. So Charles Krug was a Prussian immigrant, nothing to do with wine business in his home country, but came over in the mid 1800s and was a bit of an entrepreneur and trying a lot of different things. He was the editor for the German language newspaper in San Francisco. He worked at the US Mint as an assayer. And then he got hooked up with Augustin Harasti, who also worked at the US Mint. And they embarked on some winemaking endeavors as experiments. And that's how he got introduced to winemaking. And then married Carolina Bale in 1860, and her parents were very prominent in Northern California, and the newlyweds received a dowry of about 600 acres of land in the heart of Napa Valley. And the next year is when Charles Krug founded his winery on that land here. And then my grandparents, who immigrated from Italy as well, purchased the winery in 1943. So it's been in my family ever since, and we're into 80 years of family ownership now.
Wow, that is amazing. That's a very long established winery.
Yeah, with regards to family ownership, continual family ownership, we're one of the most enduring families here in Napa Valley with that respect.
So, who are your consumers? Who are your customers? Are they younger? Are they older wine aficionados?
They tend to be, well, given that we've been around so long, they tend to be the wine aficionados. You could skew towards the baby boomers. This has been our traditional, historic consumer base. We are working on engaging in the younger consumers. That has really been a strong push of the next generation. Let's call them the G4. My wife and I have two kids in the G4, and Mark and Janice have four daughters in the G4, active in various ways in the wine business here, but really leaning on them to engage the younger group, whether it's through virtual tastings of Facebook or Instagram Live, things like that. And we're also engaging with very high touch experiences here in Napa Valley at the estate. So, kind of trying to open up to a broader spectrum, at least from an age standpoint of consumers. But really, all these consumers are avid wine enthusiasts at one level or another.
Well, I'm really glad that you brought the younger generation up because, the market is shifting and that demand is shifting. And it looks like, at least from our end, that younger consumers are really interested in biodynamic wines and low intervention wines and orange wines and canned wines. How do longstanding classic Napa Valley producers like yourself continue to fit in that changing shift? Or are you even trying to fit in? Maybe you don't even try to fit in.
Yeah. Well, first of all, we have to really understand that the wine market is not one monolithic consumer. There's a diverse subsets within the general wine consumer groups out there, and that's one statement. And the other one is that here in Napa Valley, it's a relatively small wine producing area in California. In fact, we only produce about 4% of the California wines. So we are, Napa Valley and our family here at Charles Krug are a little more focused on our consumers. But with that said, we are working in the sustainable arena of winemaking, both in our vineyards and in the winery. We're Napa Green in our Napa Green certified in our Napa Valley vineyards, which we have a wonderful series of vineyards up and down Napa Valley. And we're in the certification process at the winery for Napa Green program from the production side. So we are fitting into this, and we are bringing in the next generation, particularly Angelina, Mark and Janice's oldest daughter. She's the formally trained winemaker in the G4 of our family. So she's working closely with Stacy, our winemaker of over 10 years here at Charles Krug, to kind of bring in more of that youthful perspective. But the other thing we're doing, as I think I mentioned earlier, is the younger consumers are looking for authenticity. We have loads of that with our four generations of family engaged with the winery, and then our estate holdings here in Napa Valley. So we're really engaged in that, and we continue to refine our winemaking style while still sticking with the classic Bordeaux varietals, principally Cabernet Sauvignon is our mainstay, which is pretty much the mainstay throughout Napa Valley.
I like how you said, like, you are thinking forward, but you definitely want to stick with the classics.
Yeah, sticking with the classics. They've endured the test of time, so to speak. Bordeaux varietals make beautiful wines. Not to diminish the myriad of other varietals out there, but you know what? There are other growing regions in California, in the United States, and around the world that can do exceptional jobs on some of these other varietals.
Well, I'm interested in, in a market where younger people are drinking canned spritzers and RTDs. How do you convince younger generations that classic wines like the Napa Cabernet, the Napa Chardonnay still matter? How will younger generations see that?
I think a couple things. One, fundamentally, education and exposure to Napa Valley wines is important. I think the canned wines and some of these other wines will bring the younger consumer into the wine segment, and those that really get engaged with it and want to pursue that interest further, I think will lead them to the Napa Valley wines. And let's be realistic, over time, as hopefully their income increases, they can afford some of the Napa Valley wines here. And with that said, we actually are embarking not under Charles Krug, but we have some other associations where we have Weston Wilder, which is a premium canned wine that we're working with. It's the varietals are sourced from the West Coast, so California, Oregon, Washington. So we are engaging in a different way with these younger consumers because they have so many options out there for adult beverage, whether it's RTDs and canned wines and hard seltzers and ciders, the list goes on and on and on. So we're trying to engage in different ways as well with the newer wine consumers out there.
I'm glad you mentioned price. There's lots of articles all around and studies about the expense of Napa Valley, and the expense of the wine. Is that going to change? I mean, do you think it's inflation? Or is it climate change? Or is it just kind of what the market is wielding right now?
I think it's a bit of the market, and I think it's a bit of Napa Valley. I'm not sure if I mentioned this earlier. Obviously, I mentioned it's a very small producing area within California and the world, but also it's really relatively fixed entity. And what I mean by that is the number of vineyards planted here in Napa Valley will remain relatively constant. It's somewhere around 45 to 50,000 acres today of planted vineyards throughout Napa Valley. If we have this conversation in 10 years from now, I would be shocked if the acreage gets up to 55,000. It's pretty much tapped out. So trying to grow Napa Valley production in any meaningful way is really not going to happen. So there's a constrained supply there. And if you go over to our counterparts in Bordeaux, especially in some of the first growths, those prices get pretty astronomical, well beyond many of the Napa Valley Cabernets being produced today. So yes, it is priced in the upper regions of wine pricing, but there are other areas, and throw in Burgundy for that matter as well. Have some pretty significant prices above us.
Yeah, yeah, I agree with that. So, as someone who has been in the region and helped establish the wine region, how do you think the wine world views Napa Valley?
I think the wine world, especially the subset of consumers that enjoy this caliber of wines, think of it as Napa Valley is extremely high quality, but I also think it goes just beyond the wines themselves. I think it's an experience. It reflects a lifestyle here in Napa Valley. Um, and really, people visiting Napa Valley immerse themselves in the experiences not only at the wineries here, because the experiences are becoming much more enhanced, much more extensive, but also the arts and culture and the food scene. The food scene in Napa Valley is phenomenal with some of these great restaurants that we have up and down the valley. Some of the world's best restaurants here. We're blessed that we're so close to the source for so many great ingredients at these restaurants, but also some of the cultural events that are occurring here, or, around, especially around music. We're engaged with Festival Napa Valley here at the winery coming up this summer. So it goes beyond just the wines and into cultural experiences. So it's very enriched here.
Are those experiences and the wines, are they welcoming to the younger generation, do you think?
I do think they're welcoming to the younger generation, and there clearly are some that are tailored more towards the more affluent and generally with more age. As an example from the cultural side of things, there's bottle rock, which is quite a draw in Napa, and I think quite a few of the younger generation attend that. It's again, it's not inexpensive to come up here, but it is a very rich, fulfilling experience when one does indulge and come up here.
What do you think the future holds for Napa? If you look into your crystal ball, and how does Charles Krug fit into that?
Always hard to predict the future, but
Right.
uh, I think the future of Napa Valley looks great. I was born a long time ago, and I've seen Napa Valley grow from a very rural, agriculturally diverse community where grapes were not the main agricultural product here to something now it's 99% grapes for the agricultural side. Extensive restaurants. When we were little kids, fine dining did not exist. All entertaining we did were at homes of the owners of the various few wineries here. So now it's a very rich experience culturally, food, wine. We do have the ag preserve in place. It just got voted back in or extended, which preserves the unincorporated agricultural or unincorporated land for agricultural use. So that'll keep that intact as opposed to being overly developed. And we have we're largely based on the Bordeaux varietals, Cabernet being kind of king out there and has a long longevity. That varietal over hundreds of years throughout the world, primarily France. So I think that is bodes very well for us. Now let me just throw you in a curveball here. You probably know
Okay.
what's coming, but we have climate change.
Hmm.
That will impact us 10 years from now, 20 years from now. I think minimal impact. I think something we can adapt to, but 50 years from now or beyond, that will be a challenge that I can't even go out and venture a guess as to what's going to happen at that point. But I think today we're seeing, just really as we see around the world, more variability of extreme events, and we can manage through these. If 50 years from now, if the climate gets universally and notably warmer here, then that'll be for the next generation to adapt to, unless we can curtail that temperature rise.
Yeah, I agree. So as far as the sustainable programs, how are you addressing climate change? Are you farming organically or lower intervention?
Well, we're fine. Definitely, definitely lower intervention. I mentioned the Napa Green program. So, very conscientious on any applications, conscientious on water use. We try to use organic applications as much as possible. And when I say we, it's not only here at Charles Krug with our family, but throughout Napa Valley. The technology has really advanced a lot. So in the old days, you would just look at the calendar and say, "Oh, it's time to put on our sulfur, application or whatever it would be." Today, we inspect the vineyards, we look at them, we walk through them, we look at the weather reports, the humidity, what's the mildew pressure out there. And we look at by a vineyard or region, sub-appellation by sub-appellation within Napa Valley. So, at Carneros being, closer to the bay and more fog may require a little more application than St. Helena, which tends to be warmer, not as humid in the morning, things like that. So we are very site specific and site sensitive as to any applications and anything we're doing in the vineyards. Whereas decades ago it was just look at the calendar and universal applications up and down the whole valley. So I think the inputs have dramatically dropped in recent years because of this practice, and as the input of water has been, because we do not want to overwater. We just want to have just enough to keep them. I wouldn't say happy, but just on the verge.
Well, I mean, that's great to hear. I'm really excited about all the new things that you guys are implementing because I love your wines.
Thank you.
I was in Sonoma and Napa like during the pandemic. It was right after I got vaccinated. It was like as soon as I was like fully vaxxed, I took a trip to wine country, and Charles Krug was I spent most of my time in Sonoma, but Krug was the only winery that we visited in Napa. And so I love the winery. I love the wines. I love the take that you have about classic wines.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for the compliments there. But yeah, the classic wines, just to kind of expand on that, we have, our family ties, roots go back to Italy. And I think our winemaking style reflects a little bit of the old world style, in the sense the wines are made to be enjoyed with family and friends around the dinner table, around food. So the wines are crafted to complement the food as opposed to be the center of show for the gathering.
So, Peter, I just have one more question for you. When you are not drinking a Napa Cab, what's in your glass? What are you drinking these days?
I love some of the aromatic whites out there. Obviously, Sauvignon Blanc, being the prime one, and that's a very important up and coming varietal in here in Napa Valley. But the lighter, crisper, more aromatic varietals I really enjoy, and so that's especially now. Well, not today, but as we get into the summer and the warmer months, I really enjoy those wines.
Oh, yeah. I love Sauvignon Blanc as well. Peter, thank you so much for joining us. It's been such a pleasure talking to you.
Oh, JC, thank you very much.
And now a word from our sponsor. I always get my favorite Italian red from Total Wine, but I wanted to mix things up a bit and try something new. Arriving straight from Tuscany are the new St. Giorgio wines from the Castellani family. For over 120 years, they've been dedicated to the craft of traditional Italian winemaking, producing top quality wines for incredible value. I just tried the Vino Nobile with a rating of 96, and it did not disappoint. And with bottles starting at just $9.99, I can't wait to try more. With the lowest prices for over 30 years, always find what you love and love what you find at Total Wine & More. Drink responsibly. Be 21. Hello, we're back and still discussing Napa Valley. My next guest is Jeremy Carter. Jeremy is the winemaker and founding partner of Tarpon Cellars in Napa Valley. Welcome, Jeremy. I'm so happy you can join us today.
Yes, JC, thank you so much for having me on. Excited to be here.
So I hear you're a Georgia native. What part of Georgia are you from?
I am, yes. I grew up just north of Atlanta, like Cobb County, Kennesaw area.
Okay, I'm only asking because I grew up in Atlanta and my partner is born and raised in Atlanta.
Very cool. Not a lot of Georgia winemakers, but there are a few.
Yes, they are. I think I've been to a few actually. I think they have a really good start.
I think so too.
Okay, so tell us a little bit about your wine journey. Why did you want to make wine and start a winery?
Well, that's a great question, and I'm jealous of some of these kids that I meet at UC Davis who are like 18, 19, and already know that they want to get into winemaking. I was definitely not one of those kids. I grew up, as I mentioned, outside of Atlanta and went to school undergrad at Florida State University in Tallahassee. Really came from a non-traditional wine drinking family. We were not one of those families that had wine at the dinner table growing up. So I really just kind of got into it through food more than anything else. I think kind of towards the end of my college career, I had a couple really just outstanding meals in Tallahassee and New York, and was really drawn to it, and that got me into wine. And I really kind of wanted to go into more of the hospitality side. I envisioned myself opening a wine bar or doing something along those lines. So I applied for all these different internships, and I got super lucky that I have my aunt and uncle have a small family winery in Napa called William Harrison, and they said, why don't you come out for an internship and learn what you can and see how it goes. And so this was 2007. Packed up everything that I owned into a truck and drove from Atlanta to Rutherford, California. I really envisioned it being a tasting room internship and kind of focusing more on the hospitality side, as I mentioned. And when I got there, they were kind of like, this is a harvest internship. So you'll be working in the cellar and in the vineyard and scrubbing tanks and cleaning barrels. And I think, like a lot of people that that do a harvest internship, they really had no idea how hard the work was. But I really loved it from really the first day. So I thought, this could be a really cool career. And I'd never really thought about winemaking as a career until my first day on the job. And so I kind of just fell in love with it and went to UC Davis, did the distance learning program for viticulture and enology over there, and did that while I was working at other wineries. So I was at Luna for a few years and Duckhorn for a little bit, Chapelet, and 10 years later, 2017, we started Tarpon Cellars.
Okay. That's a that's a great trajectory. I did a harvest in Bordeaux, and when I say I did a harvest, I've harvested like 1 hour. That's all I can do.
It is,
It's hard
it's
work.
no joke over
It's
there.
it's hard work. Okay, so why did you decide to stay in Napa and open a winery in Napa out of all places?
I think for one, starting a new winery or wine brand, I do think that Napa still has that cachet of even people that are not into wine. When you say Napa Valley, it's like, oh, okay, well, this is the real deal. And even today, I still think that holds true. But the main reason is that Napa Valley is where I lived for at the time 10 years. Now almost 15, 16, and it really feels like home in a lot of ways. I spend a lot of time on the East Coast now doing sales and events and marketing and stuff. But I lived in St. Helena for almost 10 years, and so I really wanted to make wine in a place where I was very familiar with the growers, familiar with the people. It was just kind of it felt very much like home to me.
Okay. So tell us a little bit about Tarpon Cellars. I know that you said you've been open since 2017.
That's correct. That was our first vintage. Yep.
And what kind of wines do you produce?
So we do a little bit of everything. We do make a classic kind of, I call it a 1990s style of Napa Cabernet that's, a little bit more, not lighter, but, I would say more in balance with oak and sugar and tannin and stuff like that. A little bit more restrained is probably the word that I was looking for. But then we've really found success in making these, single vineyard, but high acid, low alcohol, minimal intervention wines with some unique varietals. We do a white blend that's kind of Verdejo based. We do a skin contact Chenin Blanc, a chilled red that's a carbonic blend of Nebbiolo and Primitivo and a couple other grapes. And we really just seen a lot of traction with that, especially at some lower price points. And so that's really become kind of the bulk of our business in terms of what we're able to distribute, and even online we're seeing a lot of that as well.
That sounds great. I've actually had some of your wine and it's fantastic.
Thank you so much.
So, what are your customers like? Like, are they younger? Are they a little bit older? And do you know the demographics?
I do, and it's mainly based on online ordering and Instagram followers and things like that. But I'm in the market a ton, and so I do feel like I have a pretty good grasp on it. I mean, it's the nice thing about our portfolio, I guess you could call it at this point, is that we do have a lot of different wines for a lot of different situations, which I think is an advantage for us. We have $150 retail, single vineyard Napa Cabernet that distribution wise tends to skew more steakhouses, and so we do get an older demographic typically with and at that price point. But our Cambaro series is those four wines that I was explaining earlier that are kind of that low ABV, high acid, food friendly style. Those really skew young in terms of the broad wine consumer audience. We see people certainly in their early 30s and even in their 20s that are really gravitating towards that style of wine. And then also, I think just our brand, we really reached out to a younger generation and tried to build community around that. But it skews pretty evenly between male and female, and I would say like 28 to 34 is kind of our bread and butter, because I think they're to a point where they have disposable income to purchase some higher price point wines. But our white blend is $22 retail, so we definitely have had success with that younger audience, which I think is kind of rare in Napa.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I feel like a lot of the consumer trends are shifting, and consumers are really reaching for natural wines, biodynamic wines, canned wines. But I also like it, I know like Napa Valley is old school, I think. That's my opinion.
I would agree with that.
And do you feel that like you are alienating some of other Napa Valley customers and consumers, or like how do you view that point?
I don't think so. I mean, I think we certainly have even though it's a small percentage of our production. I mean, we have some people that think of Tarpon Cellars as super high end Napa Valley Cabernet, even though that's not the bulk of our production. But I think the biggest thing that has maybe alienated some old school, if you want to call it that, consumers, is that some of the wines that were coming out, were maybe not as clean or fruit driven as typical Napa or even California wine in general. And one thing that I will say that we have done a great job of is all the wines that we make, even though they're natural or minimal intervention or whatever term you want to use for it, they're all very clean. And so some of that is just from our pH. I mean, we're very lucky that we have super low pHs. Sometimes when we pick, this fruit is at 3.1, 3.2 pH, and you really just don't get any microbial pressure at a pH that low. I always joke that you could like take a vial of Brettanomyces and dump it into our wine, and if it's 3.2 pH, it's probably just going to die on contact, and it's just not a hospitable environment. So I think making clean wines that are refreshing, crisp, bone dry. I don't think we've alienated anybody. I think we're maybe just kind of reaching out to a newer audience, and maybe even bringing in people to the fold. I mean, I see this a lot that are maybe craft cocktail fans, or maybe they're craft beer fans, and kind of had written off wine because they had a couple wines that they didn't enjoy that much. And so I think that we're kind of reaching an audience, or even making our own audience. There's a quote from I think it's Diana Vreeland, and I'll probably screw it up, but it's something to the effect of don't give people what they want, but give them what they didn't know that they wanted. And I love that. And I
Ooh,
don't
I
know,
like that. I
I
like
don't
that a
know if
lot.
that's, thank you. And I don't know if that's something that I would recommend as a business model, but it's worked for us in some ways. And, that's exciting to me. I mean, a great example for us is we make a Provence style rosé from mainly Tempranillo, a few other grapes. But I mean, it is bone dry and zero point 0.0 grams of sugar, and very high acid. And I mean, almost every single wine dinner that we do, or tasting, or whatever event it might be, somebody will say, I don't really like rosé. I've never found one that I liked. And it's typically because, it's too sweet, or, maybe it's a Saunier and it has, a little bit too much tannin on it or something. But, when they try ours, like, wow, I didn't know that rosé could taste like this and be so, crisp. And so I do feel like we're kind of taking people that, that maybe weren't huge wine people currently, and kind of converting them, which we love.
I really like that perspective. I mean, as I said earlier, and the trends are shifting, and like people are drinking in the carbonated canned drinks, and and that's great. Do you think that a Napa Cabernet or a Napa Chardonnay is even irrelevant to newer drinkers?
I do. I think there's always a time and a place for almost any style of wine. I will admit that I don't drink a ton of Chardonnay, and I have some friends that make some incredible Chardonnays. But there are times when I eat out and I'm at a restaurant, and I'm like, what would be really good with this is a Chardonnay, and so I order it, and I typically really enjoy it with that food and that setting. What I've found for me personally, and we've kind of carried this over into our business model, is there are not a lot of times when I sit around and drink a $150 Cabernet, and we make one. So I'm not criticizing it at all. But just for me, if it's especially in the South and in California, I say the South because a lot of our distribution is down there. But if it's 95 degrees in Napa, I don't come home in my in my boots from the vineyard, and I'm like, let me, break out this huge Cabernet and sit on the porch and drink a room temperature red wine with all this
Right.
tannin. And so, I just feel like situationally, I was reaching for a lot of those, really crisp whites and rosés and skin contacts. And so I've kind of brought that into Tarpon Cellars. But absolutely, I mean, do I drink, a really nice Napa single vineyard Cabernet when I'm at a steakhouse? Or I'm skewing pescatarian these days, so I actually don't go to steakhouse as often as I used to. But there are absolutely times and places where, I really enjoy a Cabernet. So I don't think it's ever going to be irrelevant. And, I think when you look at, complexity and, the ability to age and all those things, I almost view it as like a tuxedo. It's like, it's never going to go out of style, but I'd also don't wear a tuxedo every day or to dinner on a Tuesday.
Yeah, I really do like that analogy. I like, over time, as I gotten into wine more and more, and my palate appreciates all the Napa cabs and the Napa style wine. So I agree with that. I just think it's as markets shift and wineries are really trying to bring in newer generations of consumers. I wonder, is Napa stuck in this weird purgatory of not changing? But then I see, I hear about wineries like yours, and I think I think that's great in Napa.
Well, thank you. And, I think my concern with Napa is more so the diversity of grapes. When we first started, my background is in Napa and a little bit of Sonoma, and I was in New Zealand for a little bit. But I mean, my the bulk of my winemaking background is Napa Cabernet, and so we wanted to make one, but we also wanted to make some fun styles of wines with Napa fruit that was maybe not, in the Bordeaux style of grape. And I found that, even 6 years ago, it was very difficult to find like a Verdejo, for example, or Chenin Blanc. And there are certainly, growers that are still doing that, and private, privately owned wineries. I worked at Chapelet, and I mean, one of my favorite wines at Chapelet was the Chenin Blanc, Molly's Vineyard up there on Pritchard Hill. But unfortunately, it's just really, really difficult to find that. And when you do find it, the grapes are really expensive. So you can't bring somebody a $20 bottle of wine from Napa Fruit anymore. It's just not economically possible. That's just part of the free market of Napa. It's the same reason that an apartment in Austin is 4 times as much as it was 10 years ago as well. You can't ask these grape farmers to sell, so call it Verdejo, for $2,400 a ton when they can sell Cabernet for $12,000 a ton. So I get the economics of it, but I do think that for a region like Napa, there are other voices to be heard besides just Cabernet and Bordeaux blends. And to answer your question, and I don't even know if this was the question, but I don't know that that's going to change or evolve unless you see a demand for expensive Napa Cabernet go down, because that's all it is right now, supply and demand. And there's more demand for really expensive Napa Cab than there is supply for it. So that's kind of where we are.
That's a really interesting point. I mean, because there are lots of articles and surveys and reports coming out that Napa is just gotten so expensive and the wine has gotten expensive. I mean, just traveling to Napa has gotten very expensive. So, is that all it is? Do you think it's just kind of like an inflation? It's just the market?
I do. You can't, like I was saying, you can't really tell a grower to, plant different grapes for the sake of having different grapes when, he could make, in some cases, literally 10 times more money per acre by selling, Cabernet grapes. And so I don't know if I mentioned this this earlier, but, those blends that we are, between 22 and $28 a bottle, we're sourcing that fruit. It's all single vineyard wines, but we're sourcing that fruit from Clarksburg. We work with the Herringer family out there, and so even though we're making it in Napa, it's just not economically feasible to make that style of wine with Napa fruit. So it's kind of where we are.
Do you have a tasting room in Napa?
We do. We have a shared tasting room in Napa where we make the wine at Silenus Vintners in the Oak Knoll area. And then we have a gentleman that just started for us in Napa, Jamie, that's going to be doing private tastings as well.
Okay, great. So what does the future hold for Napa? And basically, where does Tarpon Cellar fits into that? What do you think the future holds in your crystal ball?
Right. I think we're going to find out relatively soon. I mean, I think that the customers that are buying tons of 150 $200 plus Napa Cabernet, they're getting older, and so is Napa going to be able to reach out to these younger consumers and have them see value in drinking and perhaps collecting those wines? And I don't know the answer to that. It would seem that there are so many other things asking for attention for those people that are in their 20s. You can go to a really nice cocktail bar and get a really nice cocktail for, even $16, $18, which sounds on the expensive side, but that you're getting a really unique handcrafted experience by doing that. Are they going to also reach for a $200 bottle of Cab? I don't know. So I think we'll find out, as these older generations of traditional wine drinkers start to, age out of, when they're having tons of disposable income. And I do hope that there is still a place for these wines in Napa that are being made. But I also wonder if, at some point we're going to have to do something to reach out to these, millennials and younger to really draw them back in. And I think some of that is winemaking style. I also think some of it is branding and presentation. I mean, we do a lot of stuff in the nonprofit space. We do a lot of live music events. We're at a lot of festivals, tons and tons of wine dinners, and I just don't know that there are as many people doing that to be able to reach this younger audience. And I want them to, because we need that audience as an industry. So I guess that's not really a great answer to your question, other than I don't know. But
No, it's a great answer.
in terms of Tarpon Cellars, I hope that people look at us and see that there's a way to do things a little bit differently in Napa. We're a small family-owned winery. We don't have a huge winery that people can come visit. We don't have a $3 billion tasting room, and I think that there is hopefully room for people like us as well. But I think that we can mitigate some of that by being on the road and doing things in different markets where we sell wine, and even through social media. I mean, we've really grown a lot just from Instagram. And you kind of, with any business at this point, and especially when you're talking about younger generations, you have to meet people where they are. And I don't know that 28-year-olds are going to Napa as often as they used to, but they're definitely on Instagram, and they're definitely on TikTok and some of the things that haven't even wrapped my brain around yet. But I think meeting people where they are is a big part of that.
I think that's a great answer. I think that Napa Valley, along with other very established wine regions, need diversity, need wine diversity. Everything, I think everything can't be the same. Otherwise, it's boring, right?
I agree.
I think Napa Valley needs, in the very well established wineries that have been around for decades and decades, and then the ones that are doing some new techniques and low intervention. And I think that's what Napa Valley needs.
No, I think so, and I think just having something for everybody. I mean, there will certainly always be people that want high end Cabernet, and but I think that for us to thrive and flourish for 50 years or 100 years from now, we need to be able to reach out to people that like different styles and different kinds of wine.
Okay, I have one last question for you, Jeremy.
Yes.
When you're not drinking something from Napa, what's in your glass? What are you drinking these days?
Oh my gosh, I love that question. Um, it depends because I will admit that I get wined out many times, and especially when we do some of these dinners, like if we have a cocktail afterwards or have a drink afterwards, I'm not drinking more of not only my wine but anybody's wine, and so I've really been into mezcal cocktails lately. I used to like scotch a lot, and even the peaty stuff, which maybe makes me sound basic. I don't know, but I really
No.
enjoy how mezcal takes the some of that smokiness, but then you can also make a really refreshing acid driven cocktail. And I kind of had thought for some reason that I didn't like mezcal that much, and then I was in Mexico a couple of years ago, and be eating a lot of seafood and ceviche and these acid driven dishes, and I tried some mezcal cocktails with it, and was kind of just blown away. So, I love a mezcal cocktail now, almost, I would say 12 months a year. But I will say that, there's nothing better at the end of a long day than an old fashioned as well. A really good old fashioned.
Oh, yeah, I love an old fashioned. Jeremy Carter, thank you so much for being here. It's been such a pleasure talking to you.
Thank you, JC. I really enjoyed it. And just appreciate you guys having me on.
My guests today represent two ends of the winemaking spectrum, but both are producing fantastic wine in Napa Valley. Yes, younger people are drinking differently today, but a trend is just that, a trend. Maybe the answer isn't for all wineries to change their winemaking style to adjust to shifting trends. Maybe the answer is diversity. As long as there are different wineries with various winemaking styles and varieties catering to a diverse group of wine drinkers, I believe Napa Valley will never go out of style. What are your thoughts? If you like today's episode, we'd love to read your reviews and hear what you think. And hey, why not tell your wine-loving friends to check us out too? Remember, you can subscribe to this podcast on Apple, Google, Spotify, and anywhere else you listen to podcasts. You can also go to wineenthusiast.com/podcast for more episodes and transcripts. I'm JC Tops. Thanks for listening.